Okay, so we are live now. I am Molly Thorne,
And I am Sarah Joseph.
and this is our discussion for our Amazing Grace final. So I guess we'll just dive into the first question. Sorry, this light's really bright. So the first question was, what doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? And why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart, to be passionate and persistent? So what did you put for that first question?
The first bullet point I put is that he believed that all men and women were created equal, and that meant that slavery was wrong. He felt that in his heart, even if no one else around him did. He knew that slaves are people and that everyone has a chance to have a happy and free life.
That's exactly what I put for my first bullet point too. Well, I mean, not exactly, but that's what it encompasses, is that he wanted freedom and equality for men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Or for all, I should say. That's what I put in there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's basically what I put too. For my second bullet point, I put that he mentions God finding him in the beginning. So in the very beginning of the movie, he's like sitting down in the grass or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
that the person who helps him, he came up and he said that he mentions God finding him in the beginning and not knowing if he should listen to God or do something about what he wanted to do for his country. And I thought that that was interesting because I don't think at the very first he thought that he could fulfill both of those or that they were linking. So I feel like he was getting revelation from God and feeling spiritual, but not understanding that God was entering his life because he wanted to help him advocate for the freedom of slaves.
Yeah, that's a great quote, and I use that quote for a different question. But my second bullet point was also about that he believed in God. Um, but in the movie, his friend William Pitt asks him, "Do you intend to use your beautiful voice to praise the Lord or change the world?" And then a little bit later in the movie, he's talking to that woman, Hannah More, and she says, "We humbly suggest that you can do both." And so it's just like, like exactly like you said, it was a kind of a journey to realize, okay, this is actually the same thing. This is fulfilling, you know, my obligations to God and my country. So it was awesome.
Yeah. I think a lot of people probably do that in the world, and even us sometimes, not realizing that we can fulfill both things. Like
Mm-hmm.
what we want to do and what God wants to do are the same thing. Because this is not written down in my notes, but the thought just occurred to me of how many times that people have told us that we pray to know what God wants for us to do or something, because we don't realize that what we want is really what God wants for us. We just don't know that yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, we think we want something else, but God's like, no, you really want to do this. You just
Yeah.
don't know it yet. So I'm going to put the thought in your head, and then you'll be like, oh yeah, I did want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
So,
good point.
okay, well, my third bullet point was, well, it kind of was the same thing, but I had a few quotes that went with that. I said, he was torn at first, not understanding he was to do both. Wilbur seems at first to think that if he dedicates his time to listening to the Lord, that it might lead him down a different path than his advocacy for slave abolition. And then I quoted Sister Beck, Julie B. Beck. She said, this generation will be called upon. Well, this kind of addresses the second question, is why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart, to be passionate and persistent? And I quoted her for this. I said, this generation will be called upon to defend the doctrine of the family as never before. If they don't know it, they can't defend it. They need to understand temples and priesthood. And I just put that this quote explains the importance of searching, pondering, and praying.
That's great. I like that quote by Sister Beck. I said that if you don't know the doctrine behind what you're standing up for, then you will not be as successful in your efforts. William Wilberforce was successful after like 15 plus years, which is a long time,
Yeah.
but he had the doctrine in his heart about God and that what he was doing was right. And if he didn't have that doctrine in his heart, he would have given up, much sooner. I mean, 15 or more years is outstanding. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous. So, um, yeah, I think it helped him to be successful.
Yeah, I agree. Because it seemed like a lot of people in the movie, you know, they would show people who lived in poverty or on the streets or things like that, and he would take them in. And I didn't really talk about this in the movie, and I didn't go in and research it, but how did financially, when he was so drained to doing this, I was like, how financially was he able to keep all of that, like his nice home and able to feed all those people? He never showed him financially struggling.
Yeah.
Because that whole time he was, I mean, he drained a lot of them to be able to do this.
Yeah, that's true.
So another quote that I put is, I said, knowing all we can do to defend the family is in our best interest. And I said, Elder Oaks also addresses the need for reason and revelation and how they work together. He said, without the family, there is no plan. There is no reason for mortal life. Our existence on earth is centered on the family. And then I added, with slave oppression happening, their families are broken in unhealthy patterns from this who have slaves. So I just think that I read an article by Elder Oaks about revelation and reason and how they go hand in hand. And I think that Wilbur started to realize that they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My next bullet point is kind of like the one that I just said, but if you don't have the doctrine in your heart, then you may give up your fight for advocating if you don't make any progress. Yeah, that's kind of the same thing. I'm just realizing maybe I will change that. But
I had some duplicates here and there. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I just reworded that thing that I just said.
Yeah. I tried to go through beforehand, but now that I'm actually reading them word for word, I'm like, okay.
This morning I had to go through a few of my things that I was thinking about in preparation for this meeting, and I was like, I don't think I said that right. I better go back and change that. So I'm like, I'm glad I haven't submitted this yet.
Yeah.
Another thing that I said is, I quoted President Kimball, and I said, many of the social restraints which in the past have helped to reinforce and to shore up the family are dissolving and disappearing. The time will come when only those who believe deeply and actively in the family will be able to preserve the families in the midst of the gathering evil around us. And then he also said, there are those who would define the family in such a non-traditional way that they would define it out of existence. And I said that both of these quotes by President Kimball explain the need for a passionate and persistent work to be done for the family. Its very existence is at stake, and those who advocate for it are becoming few in number.
Nice. You have a lot of good quotes from other people. I didn't really use other quotes, so
I had to dig really deep. Far back in lessons, I was like, oh no, I can't just use my own words here. I gotta find stuff. Gotta be legit. Do you have anything else for the first question?
I just said that without the doctrine in your heart, you're not as passionate or persistent, and people will see that you don't really believe in what you are fighting for, so why should they believe? So
yeah, I think that goes along with a lot of the things that I feel like a lot of the things that I heard from like the guest speakers that we would listen to, how they really talked about, and I know we're going to touch on this a bunch, probably, at least I wrote a bunch about like the research and really finding out like you've got to know it to be able to like advocate for it.
Yeah. Like Sister Beck said in that quote, that you can't defend it if you don't know it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we'll move on to question number 2. How did Wilbur employ a theoretical or Bronfenbrenner's approach to become a more effective advocate? And then for that one, I went through all the systems and just wrote down my thoughts about that. So
I did too. Except I was a little tiny bit confused about what exactly we were supposed to write, so I'm not quite sure if I did that question right.
Well, you know what? When I was reading, so this is my thing, is when I first learned, well, I shouldn't say first learned because that was a long time ago, but when I really dived into Bronfenbrenner's thing and the chapter that we had to read, I had read previously in another class, and it was applying to a child. And some of the steps are not directly, like the child's not in that environment, and like I think it's like the ecosystem or something, but it affects them. And I was like, well, it did affect him though. So I think that's where I struggled, because I was like, is it supposed to be something that's not affecting him, or just concepts in the ecosystem that make it up? Anyway, so I hope I did it right also. But
So,
for
go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
The first one for the microsystem, I said that his wife supported him in his efforts after he was kind of supportive before they got married, and then I'm assuming she was still supportive after they got married. They didn't really go into that. And his cousin was trying to help him get better, but he was also in the House of Commons with him, and he was supporting him. He was influenced when he was younger by his preacher, John Newton, who was a reformed captain of a slave ship, and his friend William Pitt also influenced his advocacy course. So
yeah, those are good ones. I didn't list all of those, but I did list a few. I talked about his friend who was the prime minister, Will, and I kept getting confused. At first I thought I had their names wrong. I was like, oh no, wait, they're both Will. Okay.
yeah.
So I talked about Wilbur's friend, the prime minister, is within the microsystem. I said he developed it and was encouraged by it. Like he helped him with this whole idea, and was like, you know, encouraged him to do it. And I said, this friendship opened many doors for him and gave him insight into the next step along the way. Even his falling out was brief but influential. So that time when they like disagreed, and then like he invited him to his wedding, like I think all of that, his close relationships. And I said his friends led him to an encouraging wife. And I put he was active in the community and he knew what was going on. Like he was very aware of his surroundings all the time.
Oh yeah, he was very involved.
Yeah, not just with this too. Like I know the movie just mentions it briefly, but I mean, even like in the education system, it sounds like he had his hand in that and a few other things.
Yeah. It sounds like this abolition of slavery was his big deal, but maybe when he was done with that, he's like, well, I still have a career ahead of me, so, you know, might as well make the most of it. So it sounds like he did a lot of good in almost every aspect of life back then. So that was really cool.
It would be interesting to find out what else he got involved in besides this, because he seemed like he dedicated so much time to that already. But I was reading a little bit more about him other than what was in the movie, and I did find out that he died shortly after that law was passed, that policy came. So he didn't have that much time after yeah.
That's too bad.
At least he got to see it come to pass.
Yeah, that was his job was done. His mission on earth was done. And Heavenly Father was like, okay, you can come home.
You can finally be done. Okay, so for Mesosystem, I put that his friend, the Prime Minister, Will, got him connected to more friends and advocates. And I put Wilbur spoke out about what he learned. I put he also had meetings in his home to discuss how to help or solve the problem. He connected society with the problem they were facing, and he connected people and places. So I think Mesosystem is basically connecting all of the microsystems together. And I feel like he did a really good job of that.
Yeah. I like how you said that he connected the people with it. Like, this is why you should care about this issue. That's a good one. For my Mesosystem, I said that he used John Newton, that ex-ship captain. He used his story in his advocacy efforts, as well as his connections with William Pitt, who was now the Prime Minister. And because both of those people were so influential in his life, he was able to get, you know, kind of political advice from one and religious advice from the other, and kind of blend the best of both worlds in his efforts.
Great. Okay, so the next I talked about the ecosystem, and I said that Wilbur's entire purpose was to create the abolition of slavery. So I thought this is kind of a big one. That one in Macrosystem, I said he did this by getting out there in the community and using his resources. He got in touch with doctors who saw the slaves. He went on the ships they came on and learned about the situation. Those are things I put for the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. I said that the House of Commons, where all of this kind of took place, they passed laws that affected him, and then he in turn passed laws that affected other people. And I said that even the slave trade itself affected him indirectly. He didn't have any slaves, but that was, his whole I guess purpose was around the slave trade, and so that kind of influenced him. And then there were laws and policies that he had no part in that affected his life that, they didn't go into that much. But yeah, that one was a little bit harder for me to figure out the answer to that.
Some of them I felt kind of like crossed over.
Yeah.
Okay, so for macro system, I put he used the sources and like the technology he had, which is kind of funny because like there's no technology back there, but I don't know how else to word it. But he used them to get things done, like signing the petition, I guess was his, we would go online and have a bunch of people do it, but that must have been like really tedious and hard work to do that. And I said he wanted to merge cultures and ethnicities. He did not let race or class choose his interactions. Let's see what else I put. He was politically involved and looked to others and looked into other countries to help him make decisions. He used the idea of checking for flags on ships to help slow or halt the slave trade.
Mm-hmm. I said that he was an upper class member of society, and as a wealthy white male, he had the opportunity to influence others. He believed in God, which was a major influence on his advocacy efforts personally and in society, and his sphere of influence included everyone, the rich and the poor, the urban and the rural. It just affected everybody. I'm kind of assuming that he was an upper class member of society, because from what I know of that time period, you had to be wealthy in order to have any influence. And so we talked about that a little bit earlier, that how could he like afford to do that? And I don't know how much money it costs, but I'm pretty sure you had to be wealthy and have status in the first place to get involved in politics.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, probably. I didn't think about that. He probably like inherited a lot of his stuff and then was able to just keep it.
Yeah, because he didn't work. I mean, I don't think he got paid. So he probably just had to have the money, inherited. So, but I didn't really research that, so I don't know if it's true.
No, I don't know either. I'm not sure either. I did talk about Chronosystem a little bit. I know I don't feel like we really touched on it that much in our class, but I did just to make sure I was being thorough. But for Chronosystem, I just put Wilbur was in it for the long haul. He was very dedicated to the cause. This was a process that would impact not just his time, and it would have lasting effects.
Nice. I didn't do the Chronosystem, so
I don't even know if we need to. I just going for like.
That's good.
Okay, the third question. So how did Wilbur and his fellow advocates do and share the research, and what evidence did they provide to persuade those opposing or on the fence?
I said that they talked to freed slaves and they got their testimonials about their experiences and their treatment. They shared this information with everyone so that the harm of the slave trade became widely known and talked about. I feel like there was one point in the movie where the opposing side, I can't remember his name, but the guy with the missing fingers, he was like, how do we know that the slaves themselves even, are unhappy about this? It's like, seriously? But talking to the freed slaves, they didn't go into it that much, but that man, Equiano, wrote a book, which is another one of my bullet points, so yeah.
One of my bullet points was, I'll try not to duplicate the same ones you did, but I put that Wilbur came up with a plan to get those who were closed-minded to see the ships. And I like that scene where all the high-to-do people who had a say, he invited them on this little excursion and made it seem like they were doing something different. And he kind of was a twofold plan there. And then, he brought him up to those ships and he told him to like smell death, what it smelled like. And some of the women were crying and he wanted them to like physically see what was going on, and that it was wrong, make a stronger connection to it. And then he also gave him statistics on it. He had mentioned that like 600 slaves left on the ship and only 200 arrived. That's how many had died.
That's crazy.
So yeah, I feel like he was like creating emotion in him.
Yeah, I feel like he did that a lot. That I talked about that several times. I said that he also talked to slave traders and ship captains of slave ships about their testimonials and experiences. He shared this information with everyone, and the evidence helped back up their claim that slavery is wrong. He also printed leaflets and pamphlets, and the black man Equiano wrote a book that was widely published and read about his personal experiences. First-hand information and eyewitness accounts made up most of their arguments until they came up with the idea to change the flags of the sailing slave ships to be liable to seizure, which I feel like kind of turned the tide of their progress.
Yeah. You know what? That scene, I know I talk about it later too, but I was thinking when that man came in, I can't remember his name, came in and said he was like the lawyer and he had a plan. And I was curious what his plan was before he said what it was, but he said he was like, they were like going to cheat. And I was all like, oh no, like this needs to be legit. Like, don't cheat. And then I was like, oh, he just saying his cheat, but he's coming up with a real plan.
Yeah.
And I tried to research and look more into that just because I was curious. I was like, okay, how did that whole flag thing work? And it was confusing. I was confused.
It was confusing in the movie too. And I was trying to take notes while I was watching it to remember. And I'm not sure I understand it fully still.
I know. Well, because I don't understand the whole purpose of it anyways, of like, but you know what? The more I read about it, the more I realized that they said a lot of people carried multiple flags and multiple papers so they could pose as different countries.
Oh.
And so I think it probably halted it, but I think eventually that's when people started catching on and started carrying the multiple flags and the multiple papers, So I feel like it was a good kind of screech in it for a while, why they could get the sympathy of the people and the work could end. And so people felt more confident in getting rid of slavery, the slave trade permanently. But anyways, it was interesting. Okay. I'm trying to see if I mentioned anything else for research that we didn't already. I don't think so. I think I just mentioned about the book that his friend made. And then at the very end, his preacher friend made that document of his story, and he urged him to like share that with people. When they talked to doctors who treated the slaves.
Yeah.
I think that's all I have. Do you have anything else for that?
I just said that he argued in the House of Commons a lot. I mean, it was really slow progress, but he had to be continuous. And each member on his team had kind of a different role in their cause. And they also made petitions, which we kind of mentioned. And they targeted specific people and spoke to them using different tactics to get them to vote against slavery, which you mentioned, those people on the ship. And he kind of had his friend William Pitt kind of go and talk to that one guy. I can't remember if he was like from Ireland or Scotland or something, and kind of like you go talk to him. But
when he was like going to play the cards with them, that scene.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all I have for that question.
Yeah, that scene kind of made, I was like, oh, from the very beginning, it was there's a little bit of dishonesty and corruptness going on. It's always been a part of the plan. Okay, we'll move on to number 4. With our time, it looks like we can talk faster. So how does the film portray the importance of working together as a group, and what has family advocacy group work taught you?
I said that his friend, William Pitt, was hugely important for working together with him. He couldn't do most of what he did without him. Like exert influence and get laws passed and things like that so easily. I mean, imagine if he didn't have him, I don't know if he would have even been successful. He also married a woman who was loving and supportive, and his cousin's wife helped him, which was more of a personal support group. But I feel like that is equally important. I mean, to have your social advocates that, you know, you go to work all day with, and then at the end of the day you come home and people still love and care about you, but they're not the same people that you work with during the day. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So.
Okay. Let's see. I talked about his friend, and I talked about just that group too, that they had, that small group that kind of got a little bit bigger, and how they helped each other, and they all had like a different perspective. And I put that too, that everybody seemed to have a different angle and a different story that was important for him to know and to understand, and it helped him get the resources that they needed. So each was powerful in his or her own way, and that they were encouraging each other.
Yeah.
To, you know, keep going forward. Let's see. And then, well, it also talks about what has family advocacy group work taught you. Oh, and I did mention a sacred duty here because I felt that although the focus was on the main character in the book, it was very obvious that there was a lot of different people that made that work happen. You know, and it was really important for the group. And I also talked about our group work and like putting together our blog post, like that we all had different parts, like how we delegated it out, and it made the project a lot easier, and it made it go smoother because we all had different things that we need to do to assign out. One person wasn't just trying to do it all. I was a little worried about the blog at first. I was like, oh my goodness. But as we divided up into the group, I almost felt like, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? And everyone was like, yeah, you're doing your part. And when it all came together, I saw my work in it, but sometimes you don't realize it when you don't have to do the whole project.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's see, what did I say? Kind of the same thing, that each person in their group had different strengths and knowledge and experiences that contributed to their success. Yeah, I'll just stop there.
Oh, I just found one other thing that we hadn't talked about, that everybody can't know everything about everything. And so it's important to work as a group because there will be people who are really good at one topic, and they can inform you about that. And so you don't have to worry about knowing it all. Like, you can know a lot of information about this and share it, and somebody else in your group can know a lot about this and share it. And when you get together as a group with people you trust and you get to know, then you can rely on their information, and it makes your overall product or goal come to pass easier, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so number 5. What parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni in Alma 46? What is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? And how can you be effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices? This is a long one. I put that Wilbur and Captain Moroni each had a title of liberty that were very similar. They wanted to fight for God, religion, and freedom, but Wilbur had thoughts and feelings, I believe, from God that allowed him to progress in this fight. He might not have known that it was religion or godly act, but it was. So I feel like the Moroni was very obvious. Like, he knew he was fighting for God, religion, and freedom. And I think that Wilbur knew that he was fighting for freedom, but I don't think he really knew that he was fighting for God and religion at first. I think it took him a while to realize, if he did realize, that those were all combined and that he really was fighting for all of them.
Yeah. I said kind of the same thing. They both stood up for what they believed to be true. One was slavery, and Moroni was standing up for his religion and protection from a rebellion in the government. But they also both had a relationship with God. I think I mentioned in the movie that William he believed in God when he was younger. At least he went to church with that preacher, and then his faith was rekindled throughout his journey. And Catherine Byrne already believed in God, and so that they, both got there in the end.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't put that on mine, but I like how you said that it is mentioned that he goes to church and that preacher influenced him, and then he comes away from God, but then he comes back to it. So like the roots are there, like it's in his heart already.
Mm-hmm.
He just kind of forgot about it, I think, until it comes prevalent again.
Yeah.
Let's see, what is the second part of that question? So what is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? I think I talked about, in this part, I talked about Sister Beck's quote, how she said, if it's anti-family, it's anti-Christ.
That's a good one.
And that Wilbur believed that there should be no exception for equal treatment of God's children.
Mm-hmm.
Did you put anything in specific for that part of the question?
Yeah, I said that they were both respectful in politics and religion. They never sought contention, but they never backed down from what they believed was true, even though there was a lot of opposition for both of them. And I think that kind of is what it means to be a Christian and professional family advocate, that they are always respectful and even trying to understand the other side. The movie didn't really go into that at all, that but I think it was fairly obvious that it was these people's livelihoods. The slave trade was making them money, but to be respectful in all parts of their life. And kind of going along with that, I guess, is they were both Christ-like. They stood up for what they believed in without being rude or degrading to the opposition. They were patient and bold, and knowing as many facts as they could about their issues helped to solve their efforts. Helped in their efforts to solve the problem.
Good. Okay, I have just like this little list of things that I can do to be Christ-like, and what to do against loud and often degrading voices. So I put that I can renew my covenants, educate myself, start in my home, love everyone, understand the opposing view, believes in what they are saying, and I just put in parentheses, that's something we learned from Marsha Barlow, and to find common ground, which is also something that we found from her. And then I did talk a little bit more about, I said, in our reading of Family Policy Matters, it's just an article we read, it says state legislators report being unfamiliar with how children and families are faring in their districts and uninformed about family policies or programs that work. So policymakers explain that they do not have the staff or time to gather all the relevant data on the complex issues that confront them. As a result, they rely on information from lobbyists and special interest groups that is often fragmented, biased, and less focused on family issues. And I just put that I believe we often see our state officials as loud and degrading, and other people in government. But as this chapter mentions, that they do not have time for such matters. I need to speak up and find resources to help advocate for the family when matters need presented. So I think a lot of times we think that people in power have got all the information, but I think throughout the course we've kind of realized that they're really busy, and a lot of it's busy paperwork and stuff, and they don't have time to do the research. So we need to do the research for them and present it. And that's something that I can do.
Yeah, that's great. That's all I have for that question. So.
Okay, perfect. Okay, number 6. Marsha Barlow spoke on persuasive speaking and writing. Do Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marsha's ideas, and how so?
I said yes, he did a good job of persuasive speaking. I think that his task of abolishing slavery was so monumental that it took him so long. But I think that he was ultimately persuasive. And I think that his team used some of Marsha's ideas. They used personal stories, which she talked about. And they often appealed to their opposition's logical and emotional side. But one scene I thought was interesting, with the preacher in their group with the kind of white fluffy hair on the side.
Uh-huh.
He was preaching in his church, and he started talking about the slave trade, and everyone got up and left. And I don't know if they were just like so sick of hearing about the slave trade or they didn't care, but I thought that that might have been a good point they were trying to make, that just using religion to argue against it was not successful, which is a connection I made with those movies that we watched of those two guys.
Good connection.
Yeah, that one guy that we watched just was like using the Bible and it wasn't effective, and the other guy just used personal stories and it was a little more effective, but I don't feel like it was seriously effective.
Yeah.
So I think they combined the best of both worlds by, gathering a lot of information and going from a lot of different sides.
Yeah, it was religion and God that was driving him, but he never made it the focal point of what he was doing. He had to have that research. So that's a good point. I didn't put that in mind, but that's a good scene to bring up, is that the religion was not obviously. It reminds me of the scripture that I can't quote, but the wicked take the whatever the truth to be harsh or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is completely, but so if they don't want to do it, they're just like, I don't want to hear about it. Yeah. I don't want to deal with it. And that's what it seemed like they were doing in that scene.
Yeah, and I think it would have made him less credible, and he would have been taken even less seriously than he already was if he was like, God, this and this and this, and they're all like, well, none of us believe in God, and the slave trade was such a huge deal that I feel like he was right not to bring that in as much, even though that was like his driving force. The more he.
I wonder if maybe, at the beginning how I mentioned that I think he was kind of confused at first that he could advocate for what he wanted to and listen to God at the same time. I'm wondering if maybe that was, all part of the plan, because if God had a really righteous man doing it, maybe it would have been hard for him to like suppress some of those, gospel keys and bring him up. Like, he knew he had to do the rest of it. Like, it was in his heart, but he didn't have to, I don't think it was fully in his mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not like someone who grew up in the church and was like, okay, I have a testimony of all these things because of religion. He just had a testimony of the right and wrongness of slavery because he's just a morally good person. And then later he was like, oh yeah, I believed in God once and I feel like I'm coming back to that. So it was kind of like his underlying factor, but
like God needed somebody really well educated and willing to get out there and do that.
Yeah.
So maybe he was prepared in that way.
Yeah, I didn't think of that.
So I mentioned a lot of the same things you did, that the personal story. I mentioned that. I mentioned that he called others to action. Wilbur's purpose in the film was to call to action. He wanted big change and had to do a lot to get it. He was constantly talking to others about their role. So
that's a good one.
And in the end, he found a law that everyone could agree on. He found common ground between the two sides. He finally did. And he started with that whole flag thing, to be like, okay, no one's really going to care about this. We'll all agree to do this. So I think he was trying to find common ground with there. All right, let's move on to number 7. What role did the government policy and religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? And did you see their political system being pro-family? Why or why not? Answer all questions.
Let's see. I think the role of government, his friend William Pitt had a lot to do with that, passing laws and not being sneaky, but kind of being sneaky.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they were pro-family at first, but I think the movie didn't really go into that, and I don't know a lot of the history, but I think William made them pro-family.
Mm-hmm.
The English government certainly wasn't pro-family, and I don't know how influential he was at changing their political system, but I think he influenced individual people to value the family more, because abolishing the slave trade would certainly keep families together.
Yeah, I mentioned that. under government. And I did put too that they lived at a time when slave trade was just the norm. And so the government really was looking out for the people. They didn't think to look at different. They were thinking, yes, slaves help our families, they help our businesses and on our farms, and they're helping our economy grow. So this is a good thing. So I think the government, I don't think they were necessarily pro-family. I don't know, like, I think they were looking out for the best interest of the people, but not all the people, because slaves were not considered to be really people, you know, like having like any sort of success in life.
Yeah.
Okay. So under policy, this one I kind of struggled with. I put policy was to trade slaves for goods such as sugar and tobacco. And then I said later policy was to set to abolish slavery. But first came the policy to wave flags on ships that would help stop slave trade unknowingly to the opposing side. That's what I put under policy.
I said that the government wanted to keep slaves for their lifestyle, which we talked about. And then I didn't really know where to put this bullet point, but I thought it was important to mention, so I just put it in this question. But his friend, I can't remember his name, started talking about the revolution, like what was happening in France. And he was trying to talk Wilbur into starting a revolution. And he wouldn't have any of it. He was just like, don't ever talk about this with me ever again. And I really appreciated that, because he was loyal to his king. He didn't go about advocating the wrong way. He wanted to fight and win the right way. So he respected their government and the way that things were, even though it was, tedious and obnoxious. And he tried for 15 years. But ultimately, he wasn't like this crazy zealot who was creating chaos and against the law. He was very respectful of the right order.
Yeah, I think that's why when I told you at the beginning how when they said they were like going to cheat, and it wasn't really a cheat. It was just, I was like, no, you've been so good. You've done things so right. Don't cheat.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of that one, but that was really powerful. I agree. It was how he was like, no, I don't want to start a revolution. I just want to stick to the right way of doing this.
Yeah.
Under religion, I had, I think I had the most bullet points with this. Some of them are small, though. I put slavery is a sin, and churches spoke about fair treatment in the Warren church scene. I put Wilbur acted on his religious freedom of freely defending slaves. And I put the agency to choose is religious freedom. So he was choosing to do that. He was using his free agency to defend the slaves. And he took the testimony or book of his friends' experiences, and he worked on slave ships. And now he said, his preacher friend said that now he lived with the ghosts of those people.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about this, and so I kind of put it here. Unlike you, I didn't know where to put it, but I thought about during this question about humanists and religion, the article that we read, and I put it here, and I put that during this time period, it scientifically could have been shown that having slaves was good for the economy. And that seems to be kind of like what humanists, they are very, now they want equal rights for people, and they're very, like, with that, I really agree with them. But I think at the time, humanists might not have agreed with this because it was just the norm to have slaves. And they like to do things in a scientific process of how things are working. And I think that they would have been able to see that things were producing and going well for the economy because you have this free labor. And with free labor, you can get a lot of great benefits. So one of the 6 things that they said in the humanist versus religion thing is, we are convinced that the time has passed for theism, deism, modernism, and the several varieties of new thought. So I think that no slave trade was a new thought, like something that they would have avoided. They didn't want that. And then, so I think that maybe during that time, they could have relied more on religion instead of the humanist side, because I think humanists would have been opposed to what was what was going on with the slave trade, or not opposed, but for it, because they like things to stay the same, and they like things to be scientifically proven.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. That's all I have for that question.
Okay. Let's see. Number 8. Do you feel that Wilbur used his time on Earth well, and how did you see him showing the elements of consecration that Elder Christofferson spoke of? And I put that, yes, Wilbur did. He was devoted to a great cause, but still lived his life. He got married and he had children, and he cared for other people and for animals. So I don't think that he became so involved in it that he forgot to, live a life and do other things which were good and noble.
Right. I appreciated that he got married and had children also, because it would have been so easy to say, I'm too busy, I don't have time for that, I can't worry about a wife on top of everything else. But I don't know how much of a love match it was. The movie didn't go into their relationship hardly at all, but I appreciated their relationship.
Yeah. I also put that he fed those that came to his home, and he spoke about education. And in regards to Elder Christofferson, I said that Elder Christofferson suggests true success in this life comes in consecrating our lives, that is, our time and choices to God's purposes. And he also said purity, work, respect for one's physical body, service, and integrity. And I think that Wilbur did all those things. Even when he was really sick, he still had a lot of respect for what his body was able to do. Like, he kind of, I don't think they were married at the time, but with that woman, he was like kind of jokingly talking about, what his stomach is saying to this part of his body and whatever. He kind of made a little bit a joke of it, but he was being respectful of, it's in a lot of pain and agony, but I have work to do, and I'm just going to let it, and I also appreciated that towards the end, he didn't want to take any more medicine. He wanted to be his complete self for when his son came.
Yeah. Yeah, I talked about that later. I can't remember. Maybe I didn't, because we're almost done, but I thought I mentioned that his illness. A quote from Elder Christofferson that I put in here is that a consecrated life is a life of labor. We ought to recognize that all honest work is the work of God. By work, we sustain and enrich life. Work builds and refines character. And I think that he was a classic example of this. His life was filled with work the entire time, but it was meaningful and it was life-changing, and it helped people that he had never met, his fellow brothers and sisters in Africa who he had never met or would ever meet. He served them, and he went about doing good for them because it was the right thing to do. And he had a lot of integrity in his life.
Yeah, that's a really good quote. I like that. I think that goes along really well with this movie. All right, number 9. Any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that are related?
Here's where I talked about his health, that it looked like it was a real trial, but it didn't stop him from his work. And then I kind of asked, while I was writing this, I had the thought, like, what are some little or even big things that are stopping me from doing what I should be? It's so easy to be like, oh, I don't feel good today, so I'm not going to go to the temple or whatever,
Yeah.
So it was just kind of a good thing, like, okay, even though I don't know what was wrong with him, but it looked like he was pretty sick. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. I also put that he wasn't just focused on slavery. He did get everywhere. He encompassed what he knew to be true. And he wasn't afraid to be bold, but spoke truth. And I also put that Sister Dalton mentions from our reading, it only takes one virtuous person armed with the Spirit to change the world. And I think that that's what he was doing.
That's great. At one point in the movie, I think it was towards the beginning-ish, before William Pitt became Prime Minister, he asked him, "You don't believe you and I can change things?" And Wilberforce replies, "I would change myself first." I think that is an important insight. We'll never really make a difference if we don't believe and stand wholeheartedly behind our cause. If we are not changed by it, then no matter how much we do physically, we'll never really make a change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think in the gospel too, we talk about, families and what we can do. Like we need to go to the temple for our families, and we need to pray as families and have family home evening and attend our meetings as families. We do so much for our family, but the way to make the most of those experiences is by personally like having a testimony of something, like when I'm saying my personal prayers and I'm reading my scriptures, I'm better to help my family, because it's all about the family. But you can't strengthen something if you have no strength yourself.
Sure. For sure, that's a good point.
Okay, so number 10, what was your understanding of the doctrine of the family at the beginning of the semester, and how has it changed? I put that then my understanding stemmed a lot from the proclamation. And I just quoted a few things from the proclamation of how my understanding was. I feel like maybe since this is a course that people take later on in this field, that your views have already changed a lot from the family than from when we were freshmen. I've started to understand a lot more, but just from taking this course, I know now the little word changes in things affect the family can affect them in a large degree. And I didn't think that much about it. Like just that article that we read last week, and I can't remember, you don't know what I'm talking about. The one where we're comparing the two about women.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I thought about that one and how those little subtle words I wouldn't have thought much about, but now I can relate them more to the family and how they really are attacking the family. Really have to dissect things and look at them.
I know. And kind of along with that, I just thought of this. We're driving down the road here, and there was a clinic that said, oh shoot, something about family planning, like come here for family planning or something like that. And my husband pointed that out, and he was like, that sounds like it's a really good thing, but it's an abortion clinic. And I was like, what? So just the wording, like I was like, family planning, that's good, like they want people to have a family, but it was actually like the opposite. And so it kind of made me upset that it was so sneaky, that it's so subtle, and the wording, like you said, is so important.
Yeah. And I think from this too, that the view of the family is that we have religion to guide our morals, and our freedom of speech and our freedom of religion. We're given those things to protect our family. I think I'm associating a lot more gospel principles to I know it's all centered around the family, but I think it's just something I say sometimes, but I'm not actually making the connection. I'm like, oh, I know it is. But I'm like, if I stop and ask myself, how do I know it is? Like, I really got to dissect it. And when I dissect it, I really see that the value in it, like our freedom of speech and our freedom of religion that's in our Constitution. Just with the course of this class, I've realized how much it can protect the family when we are able to use those things.
Yeah, that's great. I'm taking, or I guess I was this semester, taking a Family 100 class, which is a class on the proclamation. And so taking both classes together was actually really rewarding, because I gained a greater testimony and appreciation for specific aspects of the proclamation. And kind of parallel to that was a testimony of why it is important to advocate and defend the family. And then I feel like from this class I gained kind of a worldly, if you will, perspective of why the family is important. Because, doctrinally in the church and growing up and everything, that's basically all that we teach. But the impact of moms and dads and children, and as individuals and as a family on society, is huge. I didn't know some of these things. And so these articles were really important. And I understand better now why I need to protect the family.
Yeah, that's a really good class. When I remember taking that and thinking how are we going to study the proclamation for an entire semester?
That's exactly what I
This is
thought.
insane. How much can we possibly know from this document? And it's amazing how much we can, especially in today's world.
Yeah, it was great. I liked it.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, so maybe we can quickly go through this last question on our list.
Sure.
So picture your spouse and children, current or future, and write down some thoughts about how they will benefit from you taking this class.
I'll just say two things really quick. Since we live in such a media-saturated world, I can teach my husband and children about using social media for good to help and influence people. And then I don't know personally what my future holds for advocating. I'm just starting my family and I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And I feel strongly about that more now because of this class. But there's a lot I can do still. I can stay updated on current issues in my community and in the nation. And my children can learn from just my example, you know, passing on what I learned to them and encouraging them to be involved is important. And then maybe, you know, later after they're all in elementary school, or who knows, maybe down the road I can have more of an active role in advocating, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, we're supposed to start in the home, so that's great. A few of the things that I put is I want better education for my kids, and I want to go to the community meetings, and I feel like this class kind of gave me that desire to do that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we just feel like we live in a certain circumstance and we just make the best of what we can, but I realize that there's more that I can do. Like I really do have more options. I'm not as limited as I think that I am. Right. I also learned a lot about loving others despite their differences. My eyes were open to that people really actually do have valid concerns. Even people who are advocating against us, they just see things completely different than us. And we really need to, I think I learned that through this class. And research, I think that is a huge one. And I think it kind of stems from last semester too, because I took a research class, which was super hard for me. But this really helped me too. A lot of people solidified that about how important it is to know your research to be able to support or deny claims that are being made. So that's a few things from my list.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Is there anything else we need to say?
That's all.
Okay, I'm going to stop the broadcast then.